Okay, I'm here. Sorry, it takes me a minute to get our Instagram live to go live. So that's why it can be a little bit delayed, recognizing that you guys are hanging out there. So you can see behind me. Let's see if I can change my direction here and show you a little bit more of what's behind me. But I have a lot of pet food and a lot of ingredient labels, and I'm going to try really hard to keep this somewhat surface level for everybody, to make it as easy as possible for you to just get some basic education about ingredient labels. Um, every pet food is required to have ingredient labels, even if it's just one singular ingredient. And you'll find it on the back. Like this is green juju. There's list of ingredients, and sometimes it can be really simple, like green juju, and sometimes it can be long and complicated and have. Let's see. Let me get. Here's an ingredient label for a food that we don't carry. See the ingredients, pretty long, and a lot of those ingredients maybe you can't even pronounce. And so it can go everywhere from simple to complicated. And our hope is we want to kind of give you a basic overview about how you read ingredient panels and how to decode them and how to know some real basic things so you can get a little bit more familiar with ingredient labels. So if you're not perhaps at our store location where you know everything that we carry has been vetted by us before we even bring it in, you'll know a little bit more about what you're comparing to and why our foods, the foods that we choose to carry in our store, are a much better fit, and much healthier for your pet. And, some of these things are what we look at when we are choosing pet foods to go on the shelves of our store locations. So, you are what you eat. That statement is very accurate. I think we all know that if we ate McDonald's every day or a high sodium diet or a high processed diet, we wouldn't be as healthy as we would be if we ate a fresh diet that had fresh foods, fresh fruits and vegetables, and had the least amount of processing to it. So the most nutrition that was available to us, we were eating, and our body would have it available in the most natural form. I think we all can recognize that that's good for us. It's also good for our pets. Our pets are no different when it comes to fresh whole ingredients and fresh nutrition. That really truly is the best for pets. However, it's also not always the most convenient. And you want to make sure that your pets are getting the good balance of what they need in their diet. And sometimes we don't know what that is. And we don't know exactly how much calcium they need, or how much phosphorus they need, or what vitamins and minerals they need, or even the amino acid complex. Things as simple as cats cannot synthesize the amino acid taurine on their own. They have to have a taurine rich diet. Taurine is found rich in muscle meat and in goat milk. But that muscle meat they have to have. And I have said this before, but I think the most unique thing about nature is that a singular mouse has 100% taurine for a cat's daily needed intake. That's nature showing you there that mouse is everything a cat needs to eat in the day, for taurine. So that's why we kind of wanted to go over these things about ingredient panels and explain to you kind of the differences between what you might see on a bad ingredient panel versus what you might see on an ingredient panel here at our store. So there's some real basic terms I'm going to go over and just kind of some information, to give you a little bit of a brief tour. I can go really deep on this subject, and I don't think that that's wise for us to spend a Friday Facebook Live going really deep on ingredient labels, although we can. And I'm happy to do that with anybody who wants to talk about it. But we'll just do a really basic overview here today. And I have my cheat sheet because there's a lot to cover. and I wanted to do it as um, directly as we could, kind of go succinctly. I don't want to lose my track. But the pet foods that we carry in our store locations, we look for pet food companies that are transparent about their sourcing. A lot of our pet food companies, you can go on their website. You can even put in the barcode or the lot code from that food, and it will tell you where the product was sourced from, where all the different ingredients came from. Um, and that's really important to us. It'll tell you where the product is made, what facility. Um, and all of those things are really important in a pet food. You want to know where a pet food's made, but even more so, you want to know where those ingredients came from. We want to make sure they didn't come from maybe China, where the soil can be depleted of nutrition. And so when it grows the produce or grows the ingredients that are included in that food, it's maybe a little bit more depleted of the nutrition as opposed to coming from the US or coming from New Zealand or coming from Europe. So, all of those things are really important. We do not carry any pet food that has an ingredient sourced from China. That is a basic for us. Doesn't mean that's a basic for all pet food companies. And just because it says made in the USA doesn't mean everything in that bag is sourced from the USA. That is reality. Okay, so here's some terms to go over. Byproduct. You will see on a lot of ingredient panels the term byproduct. Byproduct in nature is a food ingredient that is a secondary product that's left over after the primary product has been made. So, in pet food, byproducts a lot of time are usually animal parts or plant materials that are not typically consumed by humans. So, the whole creation of processed pet food started as a way to basically use the waste that humans are not using of raised animals or even grains and things like that, the millings of grains that we don't eat. They then decided, oh, well, we can take this and include it in pet food, and pets will eat it as a waste product. We can then give it to pets, and pets will eat it. But that doesn't mean that it contains a whole lot of nutrition. Now, byproduct doesn't necessarily mean bad. Byproducts could be considered things like bone, it can be considered cartilage, and these kind of things we know can be good for pet ingredients. Like cartilage is a really good source of glucosamine. So, byproduct in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. But if you see byproduct in a label, you want to make sure it says a named meat ahead of it. So, chicken byproduct meal or beef byproduct meal. Now, I would argue that it would be better if you saw chicken heart instead of chicken byproduct, because chicken byproduct may contain some organs. It may contain some good things, but it also may contain beaks and feathers, and it may contain some things that we know really aren't nutritious and are just being a way for waste to be sold to the pet food industry to be used in pet food. So be careful about the term byproduct. Natural. Natural pet food is food that contains no artificial ingredients and is made from natural sources such as plants, animals, or minerals. Natural can be pretty vague and can be pretty broad. So be careful. A lot of places will call things natural, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's what you would consider natural, because it may have some synthetic ingredients in it. We'll talk a little bit about synthetic vitamins and minerals here in just a minute. Organic. So we have a lot of people who come in and say they want an organic pet food. Great. We can find you organic pet foods, and we even carry some organic pet foods. But you have to understand the difference here. We have lots of foods that include organic ingredients. That doesn't mean the pet food is organic. Organic certification is a different certification. It has to be made in a certified organic facility in order to be labeled an organic pet food. So it's very different, organic ingredients versus organic pet food. The certified organic pet food is going to be more expensive because that certification process is expensive and it's expensive to keep up. Organic ingredients, while they are more expensive than general, I mean, if you've ever been to the produce section in your grocery store, you know organic fruits and vegetables are more expensive than non organic, but it doesn't carry with it the certification. So a lot of our foods might say organic on the back, but they don't have an organic seal on the bag. So it's two different things. So you should just kind of know what you're getting into when what you're asking for. If you're okay with organic ingredients made in a non-certified organic plant, that's okay. And chances are, there's going to be a huge difference in the price, but you're also still getting those organic ingredients. Okay, so if you have ever looked at the back of a bag of pet food, you know that there is a certified guaranteed analysis. And this is done through lab work. Once they make the food, they go in and do a guaranteed analysis. We have it on human food too. And generally, it lists the protein, the fiber, the fat, the moisture. It can also include some other numbers in there as well. Sometimes some of our foods include the amount of good bacteria that they put in there, the probiotics and prebiotics. Some of our foods also may include ash or some other numbers in there that are important for you to know. Maybe they include different minerals and vitamins. Also, all very important to know. You're also going to see the calorie content on here and the kcal per cup, which is important when you're figuring out how much your pet needs to eat, how many calories they need to take in on a daily basis. So that's important information. So that's the guaranteed analysis. And we can use those numbers for some different things. And that's what this is going to be about here in just a few minutes. Okay. And so then you get to your ingredient list, like we just talked about. I showed you where the ingredient list, and they can be as short as that. A lot of dry foods, they get a little bit longer. This is the ingredient panel for Nature's Logic here at our store location. And sometimes they kibble, dry food's going to be a little bit longer. Your shortest are going to be raw food and freeze dried, just because they are fresh whole foods. They don't have to have some of the synthetic vitamins and minerals added to them, which is what adds to your list. Okay. And if you want to compare, so say you want to compare the fat in a can of food versus the fat in dry food, you cannot just look at those two guaranteed analyses and compare them, because your moisture level is going to be different. And so what you have to do is compare on a dry matter basis. And I will explain the equation, but quite honestly, it's going to be more helpful if I go in and put the equation in the comments after I do this. And you can take that equation and apply it to the foods that you want to compare, because you're not going to remember it. I've had to write it down 1,000 times after I did nutrition training so that I could have it to refer to when I needed it back again. But I'll put that in there, but you're basically going to come up with your dry matter. You'll take the 100% and deduct the moisture, and that's what you're going to come up with your dry matter. And then you can take the guaranteed nutrient that you're trying to compare and divide it by the dry matter. And I will give you an example in the comments once I get done with this live, so that you can see how they use that equation and put it into play. But you can take that equation and apply it to each guaranteed analysis number and figure out what your fat level is in a can of food versus dry food versus even raw food or freeze-dried food. But you have to compare it on a dry matter label. You cannot, or a dry matter basis. You cannot just pick up one and the other and compare them, because you'll notice, like, this is a can of Open Farm. The crude protein in this is 7.5%, whereas the crude protein in Nature's Logic is going to be 36%. But when you compare that, taking out the moisture and comparing it on a dry matter basis, then you can really get down to the nuts and bolts, because this has like 78% moisture, or maybe even 80% moisture, and this one has like 10% moisture. So you can't compare them until you get them down on the dry matter basis. Okay. All of those are very important. Now we're going to get to the ingredient deck. And so when you're looking at an ingredient deck, I'm just going to take a screen juju because it's the easiest, it's the shortest. You're going to look right here, and they are going to be listed by weight. All ingredient decks are listed by weight. And so that weight is the weight of the product when it's added to the mixture. Okay, so if you're adding in chicken, if chicken's your first ingredient, then that's the heaviest weight of the ingredients that are added in. But we're going to go over how this might be tricky because there are some tricks that they can play with that. But if you have chicken as the first ingredient, and then as you go down, it is going to go down the weight cycle. You are really looking for a pet food who has the first 1 to 3 ingredients listed as meat, and you want a named meat inclusion. You want it to say chicken, you want it to say beef, you want it to say bison, you want it to say whatever meat is in that bag. You do not want a pet food that says meat byproduct meal or meat source that does not name what meat is in that bag of food. And here's why. They can change that meat on you. And so, maybe you constantly feed your dog this one food or your cat this one food, but it doesn't have a named meat source in there. And they get that bag every single week, every single day. And then just suddenly this day it makes them sick or they have a reaction. Well, the reason is because it may be a totally different formula than one they've been eating because the meat source isn't the same. If they don't name a meat, they do that so that they can change the meat and pick whatever's cheapest. They can pick whatever that they can get as far as byproduct meal, whatever's coming in and in most abundance and cheapest for them to use in that pet food. So you must have a named meat source at the beginning of the pet food. Very important. Very, very, very important. So if you're feeding a pet food that does not have a named meat source at the beginning of that food, you definitely want to consider changing. There are some prescription diets and some special needs diets that have the grain at the beginning, and I'm aware of that. I could go on and on about prescription foods too, but you definitely want to look for something that has meat as the first ingredient in the pet food you're feeding. Okay, the other thing to watch out for is fractionated ingredients. So you might have a pet food that says rice starch. It might say, this one is a good one. And unfortunately, I really can't show you because the ingredient panel, well, you know what? I can show you because the ingredient panel is on the inside gusset. But let me open it. This is Beneful Healthy Weight. I'm having trouble getting that bag open, but there is the ingredient panel. I'm going to read it to you. First ingredient's chicken. Second ingredient is whole grain corn. Third ingredient, chicken byproduct meal. Fourth ingredient, barley. Whole grain wheat, soybean meal, soybean hulls. So the fact that we're seeing soybean meal and then soybean hulls, if you add those together, could those in weight outweigh the chicken at the very beginning? It is quite possible. Rice, corn protein meal. So we've already had whole grain corn. Now we also have corn protein meal. Then you have egg and chicken flavor, oatmeal, animal fat, not a named animal fat, just animal fat. Again, you want that named meat source, even in the animal fat, because you want to make sure that it's staying consistent. And then it goes into animal fat, natural flavor, calcium carbonate, and then salt. Then there are some fruits and vegetables past the salt line. It says it has apples, dried carrots, dried green beans, vegetable juice for coloring, and a netto color. And then it gets into your vitamins and minerals. That salt line's very important, and I'll come back to that. Um, but if you really look at those first few ingredients, you have whole grain corn, barley, whole grain wheat, soybean meal, soybean hulls, rice, corn protein meal, oatmeal. You have 8 carbohydrates named. You have 2 meat sources named, chicken and chicken byproduct. So reality is you probably have more grain in this than you do have meat. And so a lot of the protein in this is likely grain derived as opposed to meat derived. So the other ironic thing to that is this is beneficial healthy weight, and carbohydrates turn to sugar in all of us. And if you're going to want to get weight off of a pet, you definitely don't want to be feeding them a high sugar diet, because we all know what sugar does. A high sugar diet is just going to pack on the pounds. You're not really getting weight off with this at all. It may be lower in fat, but that's really not the problem here. It's much higher in carbohydrates. So again, this is why it's important to read these labels and know what some of these things are. And the other thing to know about lower quality meat sourcing, it's important to know where your pet food meat source comes from. Lower quality meat sources, generally speaking, are higher in bone content, which can lead to things like bloat and bladder stones, among many other things. But a diet higher in bone can really create problems for the pet. And so you're going to get a much better quality food by cutting out some of that low quality meat that comes from, trying to find what's cheapest out there, which some of these pet food companies like to do. So I've gone through, and these bright orange stickers that you see on here, and I'll get them closer so you can see, but I've gone through and put the carbohydrate level on each one of these foods. Again, this comes down to a math equation that I'll include in the comments once we're finished. Once I'm done talking, I'll include that down there. But I went through and did the carbohydrates for everything. Everything from canned food, which this is 7.5% canned food, carbohydrate load. So this is 7.5% carbohydrates. Lotus has 2.5%. And then you have green juju, has 3.2%. Bones & Co. has 14%. Carnivore, you can see that one over here, is 39%. Nature's Logic, it's 33%. And you have Farmina is 34%, 34.6%. This is the cat urinary. Then you have the Beneful Healthy Weight. It is 47.5%. These cans, this is Pro Plan, it's 5%. This is Royal Canin hydrolyzed protein, and it's 14.7%. So why do we use carbohydrates if it just turns to sugar? Why do we use carbohydrates if cats cannot digest it? They lack the amylase in their saliva to break down the grains. Why do we use it? Why do we use carbohydrates? Well, the reality is, in kibble, we have to use some kind of binder. And that comes in the form of carbohydrates. It can be a wide variety of carbohydrates. It can be potatoes, peas, legumes, tapioca, millet. It can also be grains. It can be rice, oatmeal, barley, whole grain brown rice, you'll see a lot of those kind of carbohydrates. And why do they use carbohydrates? So that the meat will still stick together. If you've ever made a hamburger, you know that you need carbohydrates to stick it together. You need to add a little bit of breadcrumbs. You need to add in a little bit of egg. Sometimes you need to do something to make that meat stick together. Otherwise, it just falls apart. And so that is why we use carbohydrates in kibble. Now, not all carbohydrates are created equal, and some are better than others. Now, do I think dogs and cats need carbohydrates? No. Dogs can accommodate carbohydrates a little bit better than cats can. Cats shouldn't eat any carbohydrates at all. But they do when they're being fed kibble, and even the best kibbles that we carry, you're still going to struggle with that carbohydrate level. You're still going to be giving carbs if you give a dry diet. This is why we really recommend giving a canned diet, because you see, canned food, you can get much lower on the carbohydrate scale using a canned food. Same with our freeze-dried and raw diets. You can get a much lower carbohydrate scale than you would with canned food. I mean, than you would with dry food, just because you're not having to stick it together like you do kibble. So that's something to think about when you're talking about carbohydrates. Look at the carbohydrate load. The best carbohydrate load, I mean, the absolute best dry food out there for dogs is going to be 30% carbohydrates. That's the lowest you can get. Usually, more commercialized pet foods, maybe coming from some of the larger pet food companies, hang around 50%, somewhere between 45 and 50%. Most of the pet foods we carry in our store somewhere between 30 and 40%. So again, not all pet foods are created equal, and there's a reason that our pet foods are a little bit more expensive. They're more calorie dense. And so if you were to take this Nature's Logic and look at their kcals per cup, the kcals per cup in this are 417, basically it's 417.95. And while not exactly a good comparison, because this is intended to be their healthy weight, look and see what their kcals are per cup. Kcals per cup are 331 in this bag. Now, it is intended to be a healthy weight, so I'll give them a little bit of a break, but you generally are not going to find commercial foods out there, the larger commercial foods out there, much higher than 400 with their kcals per cup. And the other thing to think about is some carbohydrates carry protein with them. And so when you're looking at the protein numbers, you definitely want to consider how many carbohydrates you have in there, and where some of that protein elevation may be coming from. Is it mostly from meat, or is it half from the corn that's in there, like with this one, and half from the meat? Because you definitely want what your pet to eat, the protein that they're eating, to be majority from meat sourcing. Fats and oils, all of these foods have fats and oils added to them. You need to know that fats and oils are not very stable. They are highly affected by heat. And so they do get sprayed on again after the kibble is made. They go through the process of baking, and then they spray on the oils after to add them back into the food. You need to know those are very reactive and very sensitive to air. And so once you open that bag of food, it starts degrading. Those oils and fats start to degrade, and within about 3 to 4 weeks, they're going rancid. So if you're getting a big bag of food and going through it over the course of 3 months, by the end of those 3 months, your food is rancid and could be making your pet sick. We really recommend buying a bag that your pet can use within 3 weeks or less, but 3 weeks, no more than 3 weeks, should that bag of food be fed. Because after that, it really does start to get rancid and can make your pet sick. Okay, additives, vitamins, minerals, and preservatives. So you definitely want to look for a natural source of preservatives. If you see BHA, BHT, Those are some chemical preservatives that are known carcinogenic, have known carcinogenic properties, and you want to avoid those at all costs. But all of these foods are going to have some type of preservative in them. Um, a lot of dry foods are going to use vitamin E supplement as their preservative. Um, but you'll find a lot of different kinds of preservatives, but look for the least synthetic. Um, Minerals, vitamins, and minerals. When you cook the foods and make a baked diet or a extruded diet, can be very hard to not have to add back in synthetic vitamins and minerals. And the reason is because they get baked out of the diet, and so they have to add them in to make sure that they have the levels that AFCO approves. And we'll go over AFCO in a minute, but you definitely want to make sure that those vitamin and mineral contents are at AFCO levels. And by doing that, they sometimes have to add in synthetic vitamins and minerals. Now, even if they're good sourcing for synthetic vitamins and minerals, they're still synthetic. And maybe you take vitamin C, synthetic vitamin C every day to boost your immune system. You have to take 10 times the amount of synthetic for your body to take it up at the rate that it would from a naturally derived source. The other thing is that the synthetic has a mirror image of the naturally occurring vitamin and mineral. So the body sometimes doesn't know what to do with that. They don't know how to process it. So it might get stored in the liver, or it might get stored in lipomas in your dog's body because it doesn't know how to handle it, doesn't know where to put it, because it doesn't recognize it. So those natural vitamins and minerals, even as natural as they are, can sometimes be a problem for your pet. So you definitely want to look for pet foods that have the most naturally derived vitamins and minerals. Now, the two kibbles I pulled from our store today, I pulled on purpose because neither one of them have many synthetic vitamins and minerals. Um, and so that is a lovely thing. The Nature's Logic derives their vitamins and minerals from plasma that's sprayed onto the kibble once it's baked, and that makes up for all of their vitamin and mineral content needs. And then Carnivore uses sprouts to get their vitamin and mineral content to where it needs to be. Let's see if I can make this. They use sprouts and kelp. That's their ingredient panel right up here. So you see how short it is, and it doesn't have any vitamin and minerals added in. They get it all from the ground sprouts. So that's why that's important. Now, I said earlier that the salt level in food is really important. And the thing to know about salt is there's not really, salt is in all of the pet foods, and it is a necessary ingredient. However, everything after salt is going to have less than 1%. That food is going to have less than 1% of those different things, because salt at 1% is going to make the food so bitter the dog or cat's not going to like it. So you know that if you hit the salt level on the ingredient panel, everything after that has less than 1%. And I said that about this ingredient panel because I was saying you have salt, and then you have mono and dicalcium phosphate, glycerin, dried apples, dried carrots, dried green beans. So you would think, wow, this has fruits and vegetables added in. It has so little fruits and vegetables. It maybe has one green bean, and it maybe has one half of a carrot, and maybe one slice of an apple in this whole bag. So it doesn't have very much in the end, because it falls after that salt line. That's why that salt line is really important when you're looking at ingredients, because you may look at it and see those fruits and vegetables, and it be misleading for you to think that it has all these fruits and vegetables in it when really it has one blueberry. So another little tip. We've talked about meat, but we did not talk specifically about meat versus meat meal. So you may see on a bag where it says chicken meal. Maybe it doesn't say chicken byproduct meal, it just says chicken meal. And some bag may say fresh chicken. What's the difference? Well, the difference is when it gets added into the mix, fresh chicken is so like the muscle meat that you buy at the grocery store thrown into the mix. But the thing about that is that muscle meat is made mostly of water. And so if you're looking at the ingredient deck and they have fresh meat in there, you don't necessarily know that they have included enough of that meat in order to be heavier once that water is removed than the next ingredients. So the other ingredients may actually overpower that chicken, is the point. Meat meal is richer in protein because it has been rendered, it has been cooked down and a powder created, and it's called meat meal. So chicken meal, beef meal, it has already been rendered and rendered down without all that moisture in it. And the benefit is it becomes richer in protein. The downside is it's already been rendered and been processed once, and now you're going to put it through a whole nother process of baking in the diet. So it might remove more of the nutrients that you would get from that protein source. So there's pros and cons to both sides. I wouldn't say that any one side is the right way, but just know what the difference is. If you're adding in fresh meat, it's going to be full of moisture. And it's not necessarily just because it's listed first, you're including the weight of that moisture too when it's added into the mix. So wet meat contains about 70% water and 12% protein. Dehydrated meat contains about 5% moisture and 70% protein. So you can see the difference between the two. And so, some may say dried chicken or dried meat. It's the same thing. It's still chicken meal or meat meal. It's just maybe been dried at a lower temperature than cooked or steamed at a really high temperature. Okay. So, in short, just to evaluate all that we've gone over here, because I know it's been a lot, you're going to look for a named meat source in your pet food. If you have an unnamed meat source in your pet food, maybe it says animal fat, maybe it says meat flavor, maybe it says meat meal, you need to run away from that pet food really fast. Come and see us because we can help you. But you don't want an unnamed meat source in there because it really can be whatever meat. And I hate to tell you about some of the things that it could be because it's not pretty. And it's not the meats that you would necessarily think you would be feeding your pet. Because it might say, it might say with chicken flavor or maybe with beef flavoring. All they have to do is name where that beef flavor comes from, and it may just be from a flavoring and not really from the meal that's being included. It is amazing the different regulations and how sneaky those ingredient panels can get. So making sure you have a named meat source avoids all that trickiness. You also want to maybe seek a pet food where you can identify their sourcing. You could go on their website and read about their sourcing. I didn't bring it over here, but Open Farm is wonderful because you can scan this little code on here, and it's going to tell you the sourcing for this pet food. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to see the farms where that food is raised. And then I talked a little bit about AFCO. So you will see on the back of foods frequently. Let me see if I can find it on here. So this one says, I'm not going to hold it up because it's so little. It says Lotus Pet Food Just Juicy Boneless Beef Shank for Dogs is formulated to meet the nutritional levels established by the AFCO, which is Association of American Feed Control Officials, dog food nutrient profiles for all life stages, including the growth of large breed dogs. So AFCO is a governing agency that regulates nutritional guidelines. They do not test pet foods. They do not conduct feeding trials. They just have guidelines for foods to follow. And so pet food companies have a couple of different choices. They can make it to the nutritional standards of AFCO and say that the food is made to the nutritional standard. They can do a feeding trial. A feeding trial is not really all that great. Their standards are not that great. Dogs just have to stay alive for 8 weeks being fed that food. You don't really have to measure for health of the pet. You just have to prove that they stayed alive. And so it doesn't necessarily come with the guarantee that it's a healthy food just because it says that. Now, AFCO has those nutrient profiles, and there's a lot deeper dive we can do on AFCO. But just because it has that AFCO certification doesn't mean that it's a quality food. I need to be clear about that, because sometimes people walk in and they're looking for that AFCO seal and they think that means it's going to be a healthy food. That absolutely is not a certification of healthy food. It just means maybe that dog, they had a group of dogs. They fed those dogs the feeding trial for the 6 to 8 weeks, and the dog did not perish. Dogs did not perish because of it. And they can pull out certain dogs, even if they did pass away, pull them out for certain reasons. It's a whole thing. So just because it says AFCO doesn't mean it's healthy. Okay, we also would like to point out that sometimes dogs do have pet food sensitivities. Just because they're allergic to chicken doesn't mean they're allergic to chicken fat. So we can work with you on what your pet food sensitivities are. We can also help you do an elimination diet to really reduce down what you're feeding them and see if we can identify what they're sensitive to. Sensitivities can be chewing feet, licking paws, itching, scratching, hives, losing fur. It can look like several different things, but we can definitely help you track that down and see if maybe there is a pet food sensitivity going on. It can help you avoid things like Apoquel, which is an expensive medicine. It certainly has its place in this world for dogs who have severe allergies, but you definitely want to try to avoid that if you can. And if a simple food change helps you and saves you $60 a month for the Apoquel, it's worth that little bit extra you're going to pay for the pet food to be feeding your pet a healthier diet. So definitely come and see us if you have a dog that seems to be exhibiting some sensitivities. We can help you with that. The last thing I'll really say, because this still seems to be a point of misinformation out there, grains do not support heart health. And just adding a grain-free diet doesn't mean that you're going to reduce the risk of DCM in your pet. DCM has always been around, and there are some breeds that are more prone to DCM than others, but there has been no correlation between adding grains into your pet's diet and the reduction of a risk of DCM. There has been multiple studies done in the last 5 years about that. There's been no confirmed research saying that there is a connection. And I will say, dogs and cats in nature are not going out and seeking a whole lot of grain content. While they may eat them, especially dogs may eat them occasionally, they're not going out and going on the hunt for grains. They're really going out on the hunt for prey, and they're looking for meat sources, especially cats. So consider that, and consider what a dog and cat really do need, which is a fresher diet, something like maybe a freeze-dried or a frozen diet. And if you can't add that in completely because you maybe have a Great Dane that can't eat all raw, maybe adding in some components of a fresh diet will help your pet's health. And then also feeding them a premium kibble help reduce your pet food budget, because I know these really big dogs can be very expensive to feed a fresh diet to. And yes, Lindy has said she loves carnivore for her boys. Carnivore has been a wonderful addition to our lineup, and I love that it's synthetic free. It makes all the difference in the world to have a synthetic free pet food, and it is a baked diet. I didn't cover this, but baked diets are cooked at a lower temperature. So think like you're baking cookies. It's cooked at a lower temperature, generally has a slightly higher moisture content than your extruded kibble. Extruded kibble is cooked at a higher temperature for a shorter amount of time. And those higher temperatures can really affect the vitamin and mineral content in pet food. Um, the last thing, I am going to give you the different math equations that I have talked about. I will put those down in the comments, but I will say one of the things in here for figuring out the carbohydrates, it takes an ash content. Most pet foods have an ash content for dry pet food of 7%. Sometimes it's different and it'll list it on the back, or you may have to call. Wet food is 1.5%. Ash is literally what is left when you take a sample of the food and burn it. Burn it down. It's that ash content. It's the vitamins and minerals that do not burn. And so it is what you would think it is, what it said. But higher quality foods usually have a lower ash content. Um, Lower quality foods usually have the higher ash content because, again, you tend to get what you pay for. Okay, we got through it. And let's see. 45 minutes. I knew it was going to be a long one, guys. And that was even just a short little Reader's Digest version of all this. You see how complicated it can be, and you see why it's important to buy your pet food from a store like us, where we vet all the products, we research, we know what we're putting out on our shelves. And I'm not saying that all of our foods are top quality foods. All of our foods are great quality foods. We kind of have good, better, best on our shelves because you know what? Everybody has budgets that are good, better, best. And so we're trying to provide the best food we can for the budget you can accommodate. And I will say that we hold all of ours to certain quality standards with regards to testing and ingredient sourcing. Those are all pretty basic for us. And so I would tell you, I would feel safe feeding my pet any of the pet foods that we carry. I certainly opt to choose a raw diet, but I would feel safe if I needed to feed any of the pet foods in our store. So that's why it's important to shop with All Pets Considered, because we know about all these things. 45 minutes worth of me explaining this to you, and you can cut out all that homework and just shop with us. And you can come in here and pick what works for your budget and for your pet and trust that we've done the background work that I've just reviewed for you. Oh, Lindy, you're so sweet. Yes, wet food is wonderful. Any kind of moisture that you can feed to your pet during their meals is the best. Adding bone broth, adding wet food, adding goat milk, adding water, any of those things are wonderful things to add to your pet's diet because they really need that moisture for the digestion process. Okay, guys, I'm out of breath. This weekend, we're going to be busy with events, and tomorrow starts our Boo Bags, our Stuff a Boo Bag, and we will be posting more things about our Boo Bags here very soon, but it's a way for you to get discount on Halloween products. If you haven't made a Boo Bag for your pet, you need to come out and make a Boo Bag this weekend. It will be staged discounts, but I'll tell you our Halloween is already starting to sell out. So you want to make sure you get by to make your Halloween Boo Bags, both store locations. And we'll post more about that today on social media, and we'll post more about it as the days come. Sunday, we're going to be at Country Park at their big event for the animal shelter. We will be handing out candy and goodies and all kinds of samples. And then next week is our Halloween superlative week for all of our employees. So you definitely want to come in every day and see all of our staff dressed up. We're going to have a super fun lineup of costumes next week for our staff. And then on Halloween, we are going to offer trick-or-treating for your people, kids, adults. We're not going to question if you want a piece of candy. But for people and their pets, we're going to have a bowl of samples out for pets and a bowl of treats out for people. So come and see us on Halloween and check out our social media. You definitely need to be following our social media next week. We have some great costumes coming. Excuse me, all this talking's made my throat dry. Well, I hope you have a lovely weekend, and I hope this has helped and given some information that you didn't already have. Oh, yes. Thank you, Nicole. Nicole wanted me to talk about our Raw Curious class. That is a perfect segue. So I've talked a little bit about feeding raw. I told you I feed my pets all raw, and I have since 2015. And I'm a big advocate for feeding raw. Um, but I know it can be expensive. We are going to have a Raw Curious class at our Battleground location on November 13th, I believe it is. And you can sign up through our social media. There's just a simple sign up list. It's free of charge. You can come and just learn, and there's no commitment, and you get free stuff. Like, why would you not want to come? And it's with our fabulous rep from OC Raw. She's going to come and talk about her raw additions that you can add in even to a kibble diet. But Wendy's going to be here. She has all kinds of raw knowledge, and we're so excited to host her here. It is November 13th. I hope that was not Nicole telling me I am wrong about that, but it is on our social media page, and you can go through there and RSVP and let us know that you're coming so that we can have a seat set up for you at our Battleground location. And again, it's the Raw Curious class. Thanks, everybody. You guys have a great weekend.